here.
Ain't you kind, sir?
Call him Arthur. He's one of us, a fellow man of distinction.
Welcome to the first episode of Ride With Me, a podcast about the queerness of Rockstar's Red Dead Redemption 2. As many of you know, this game, set in 1899, tells the story of the Dutch Van der Linde gang as they flee from the law and shoot their way across the southern United States. You play as Arthur Morgan, Dutch's loyal and brutal right-hand man. Throughout the story, Arthur is in a constant internal struggle between his distrust and aggression towards society versus his natural tendencies towards empathy and kindness. The good and bad of Arthur is influenced not only by the complex world of the game, but also by the many characters that he interacts with throughout the story. So, why is this podcast focusing on queerness? Warning. Here, there be spoilers. Hi, my name is Amanda Garner, otherwise known as Hillbilly Hipster 84 on various social medias. Thank you for joining me. I originally watched my wife play Red Dead Redemption 2 back in early 2019. I loved it, as many of you did. But because I was not much of a gamer, I had no interest in playing the game myself. It was vast and intimidating. Plus, it was so easy to kill your horse. But then in 2021, I suddenly was hit with a neurological disorder. I was sick all the time and had to quit my almost 10-year teaching career. I had also been very active outside, taking nature walks and working on big house projects. I was a big, strong, nature-loving, and tough-talking adult who mentored young people. Sound familiar? My wife thought so too. While I was homebound, she basically forced me to play Red Dead Redemption. And like most of the fans of the game, I found a soul-deep connection to Arthur and the story of the game. I was never the sort of person to actively look for queer content in media. Having been an educator, I was always very quiet and private about my personal life. But with my health making me leave the field and having begun playing my first run of Red Dead 2, I started noticing queerness in the game. It was that feeling that many of us have when we know something is essentially queer. So I went searching online for other folk who felt how I felt. To me, the game was so obviously queer that there must have been a plethora of sites dedicated to it. But there wasn't anything obvious at first. It took a lot of digging. I found lots of amazing art and fan fiction that supported it, but no real source that referenced moments in the game or interactions with characters that were clear evidence of queerness. There were lots of discussions dotted here and there, but these were unfortunately overrun by trolls and bigots. I'm going to go ahead and say that if you are a stout believer that this game is a big ol' celebration of manly straightness, and how dare I assume they gay, go on, shoo. This isn't for you. However, if you, like me, notice something more, keep listening. When it comes to the LGBTQ friendliness of the Red Dead fandom, it can be a minefield. I'm talking about you, Reddit, but all my early research about the game actually led me to Twitter, of all places. And I ended up becoming a first-time user because of the largely kind fandom there. There were 2 Red Dead fans on Twitter whose content wasn't intentionally linked to queer themes, but rather they focused a lot on the game's central message of love and kindness. Through these individuals, I met so many of what I now call high-honor fans, as well as many of the actors from the game. And a lot of us chatted endlessly about the game itself, and often about its queerness. Many of us had a similar story, in that we had gone to social media to find validation for our views on the game, only to be bullied. But then we found that validation together, which is so queer in and of itself, to be chased away by the aggressors of society, but then find safety and acceptance in each other. I began researching queer history of the 19th century and sharing online how it all relates to the game. A great deal of my research comes from the following sources: the site Queer Life and Literature in the 19th Century of USF Libraries Tampa Special Collections, the Addison Heron Wheeler article from Outfront magazine titled History of Homoerotic Cowboy Imagery, Aspects of Queer Existence in the 19th Century America by Rich Wilson on outhistory.org, and the amazing Kaz Rouse videos exploring the queer history of the Wild West, yeehaw, and the wild, wild history of gay cowboy movies, and more. These videos in particular are part of Kaz's historical essay series. They do such amazing work on the research, and I strongly recommend watching their videos on YouTube. These references will be listed alongside this podcast. I started sharing queer historical tidbits that showed up in Red Dead. Many of my new friends online and strangers alike expressed great interest and appreciation for these connections, and many folks shared with me more evidence in the game that I had not known. But again, there was no collected resource for all of us to hold on to, supporting our experience of Red Dead Redemption 2 being a game with queer themes and characters. Being a teacher by nature, I knew that I wanted to help provide that resource and to validate all of us in our connection to the queerness of the game. So I reached out to all my high honor friends online and gathered up evidence supporting this. I also did a ton of research over the past year about queer history and literature through my 3 playthroughs of the game. And oh my, there is so much in this masterpiece that is gay, that is queer, that is wonderful, in ways you might not have realized. For this episode in particular, I wanted to discuss a broad overview of the queer themes in Red Dead Redemption 2, that I will go into greater detail in future episodes. I spoke with 2 fans and friends about what queerness means to them and how each of us find Red Dead Redemption 2 as a queer game and story.
I'm Lauren, also known as Majink on Twitter. So I'm a big fan of Red Dead and Star Wars and lots of things really geeky. So glad to be here.
I'm Rhiannon, also known as Riri the Lawless on both Twitter and Instagram, I believe. They, them pronouns. I really love Red Dead. I'm autistic, so it's like really become my hyperfixation. I'm very nerdy. I know a lot of like true crime facts that I probably shouldn't know. And I can talk your ear off, and I'm really country, but I'm also like kind of very city too. So it's nice to be here.
We're in 3 different states across the country. We have a lot of people who we're friends with online who come from all over the country and all over the world who are fans. So I guess my first question for y'all is, tell me, how did you get into Red Dead Redemption?
So the previous relationship I was in, I was living with my boyfriend at the time, and I saw him playing it, and I was like, oh, okay, watching him play, I was like, this is kind of like GTA 5, but with cowboys. But we broke up, and so like having to move back in with my mom, and it was just like a really, really emotional time for me. Playing it during a time when I felt like literally at my lowest. I had quit my job. I was just like so distraught. I was emotionally in a place and mentally in a place that was not the greatest. And so I just kind of felt trapped, and playing Red Dead gave me the exact escape that I felt like I could just segue into at any time where I'm just like, I had the roughest day. And so being unemployed and scrounging for a job and struggling, Red Dead was just a place that like I could just really be okay for a little bit. So I found Red Dead at a time where I least expected it.
So it's actually so funny because the first I ever heard of it, I was in high school and my brother was playing it. My brother Matthew, he's 3 years younger than me. And he was playing the first game, but John. And I remember watching him playing it from time to time, and I was like, this is pretty cool. But at that time, I had never picked that up. And right after high school, I went into college, and I remembered, I was like, hey, I remember this Red Dead game, and I know that there's a new one out. So I'm going to play the first one, and then I'm going to go back and like play the second one. That was like a few years ago. I played it in 2020.
Mhm.
So, and then 2021, I had got COVID in January of that year, had to stay in bed, sick and stuff. And after finishing the first game, it was my time to play the second game. And the second game just like hit me so much more emotionally. And I had just not only did I have COVID, but like Riri had a bad breakup. I also had a bad breakup around then. So my ex-girlfriend at the time, but it was just really bad and toxic. And yeah, it just helped me cope with a lot of that stuff. And I never thought I would be, so engrossed in something based on Westerns, because growing up, I was always used to like my grandpa liking Westerns and the very stereotype, like it's this white man that's like this vigilante that's gonna save the day,
Yeah.
So it helped me to reintroduce it in a different way, and just in a more inclusive, broader, more on the darker side of things, but Southern Gothic type feeling, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
And it just appealed to me in those ways, and just the humanity of it, and how people are not, completely good or bad people, So yeah, that's how it really struck me, and I've been hooked on it for years now. I just love it. There's so much about it that's just great.
When we were all basically introduced to the game, on the outside, the game looks like it's going to be just every Western trope out there. And it does have that, but I think it's just sometimes I find it just so fascinating that I'm like, I would have never picked this as my fandom. A Western.
Oh yeah.
I would have never done that. And it's still explaining that to people, like, like, oh, this is cowboy stuff. You like cowboy stuff? Like, really? And it's, yeah. And it's so weird to know that something that on the surface looks so like you said, Lauren, it's the white man. It's a Western. It looks like a traditional Western. It's big old tough guys. How is it that, knowing that, you're queer people, how does that feel, like knowing like you become like this into this game?
Growing up, I had like such kind of a disdain towards like country culture and stuff. I don't know. I always felt like people kind of made me stupid, because when you come from like one part where it's like very country, and then you become an adult and you graduate and like you're in college and stuff, I felt like this little country bumpkin who literally did not know anything, and because just undereducated. And so it's like growing up, I disdained like anything country. I didn't want to be nothing like it. Didn't want nothing to do with it. And yet here I am, like just falling in love with this game that is just country as all get out. And it kind of made me relook at some things in different light. I'm like, I do kind of have a fondness for these things because I did grow up with them. And also the inclusivity. Being Indigenous, you don't really like see a lot of us in the media that's like not a very racist depiction, or like, oh, they're from the old days. They don't exist anymore. They were in the Wild West.
Yeah.
And so playing Red Dead, I remember the first time I like actually sat down and was playing the story, and I saw Charles, and then it was revealed that he was like Afro-Indigenous. I was like, what? I was so happy, because Afro-Indigenous people don't get enough representation in media either. And seeing the representation of Indigenous people in a way that's like a hell of a lot better than like most Westerns, it was just very refreshing. And I would have to say, like, Red Dead's writing, it's not perfect, but then again, it's the Wild West. So, racism and everything in that time. But the way I think the story went and how it brought in Indigenous issues that were happening in that time, but also including Arthur and his allyship and him not quite understanding all the depths. I think the game just touches a lot of boundaries there that need to be spoken.
Where does queerness fit in with all of this? Because I was talking to Lauren earlier. It's like we're constantly hearing this, oh, y'all didn't exist before like
Yeah.
movie.
It's like, okay.
Yeah. And it's like, and I think, I don't know why I never put it together that Westerns throughout our history, especially in film, have a huge amount of queer coding in them. The earlier films, like the early black and white ones, have more positive queer, and then the later ones are all very negative queer portrayals. But it's just, how come I didn't see that? Why didn't I make that connection? Where it's like, why didn't I, before Brokeback Mountain, ever put this
Oh my gosh.
together?
Yeah.
Like, it's not
You know,
unique.
no,
Yeah.
I think that's a good point because like I was saying, like I had never thought I'd be interested in this genre because of like in like the 50s and 60s, it was all like this very like, white guy, whatever, being macho, like getting into women and all this stuff, and I was just like boring. I don't want any of that. And I didn't know how varied and queer things could be, or like how inclusive things could be. Like not all of it is negative.
Our history is luckily something that's being much more delved into lately. There's so much new articles and books and media, especially, oh my gosh, YouTube people, look it up, 18th and 1800s queer stuff, and it's, I think it's so great this is happening, but it's taken a lot of not just digging through history, but digging through context and trying to put things together. And so then it comes down to, how do you recognize queerness in history? And that varies from person to person. So what is queerness to you? Like, how do you identify or connect with things as a queer person based on your experience? Lauren.
Like queer has always meant something that's not the like cis hetero expectation of a lot of in society. Like, and it's an umbrella term for things that go outside of that for me. Like for me, like my gender identity is between like feminine and like non-binary. So that's why I go by like she, they pronouns. And a lot of people are confused by that because they're just like, well, I mean, why aren't you just like they, them if you're like on the non-binary like spectrum? I'm like, well, because you just said it, like gender is a spectrum.
Yeah.
So that's what queerness means to me, is that there's this larger spectrum than just this like cis hetero thing that people expect people to be.
The way I define queer for myself is it's just the freedom to be whatever you want to be. Like Lauren said, it's a spectrum. There are so many different avenues that people discover that they are. And sometimes it's sooner in life and sometimes it's later. But like I think the beauty of the spectrum is how one person can just grow into more of themselves. Like me, when I was first like accepting myself as a queer person, I identified more as bisexual. And then over time, I was like, I think more it's pansexual because I really don't care what gender you are. And then now these days when I was like discovering my gender, when I was exploring that avenue, and I just realized I feel more along the lines of like gender fluidity than non-binary. I don't feel like I'm anything. I'm like something but nothing at the same time. It just feels like a wave. Like I guess the best way for me to describe for me queerness, because that's just what I use now, because sometimes titles for me doesn't always feel like it defines me the way I want them to. So for queerness for me, it's I mean, a wave, no matter how big it is or how small it is, or even if it's just touching the beach or what color it may be, or if it's like during a storm, we still call it waves. So it's like my gender is still a gender, I'll still be like they, them, no matter how I appear or how I may like express my identity. So queerness for me is just whatever you want to be. There are no boundaries. You're the lawless.
I mean, I express my queerness through how I interact with other people. I think, and it's real weird. It's so weird for me to describe this to other people because it's like, I feel like if I am showing a lot of interest in something with person, um, and like really volunteering myself emotionally or, or help wise to the needs of a person, that to me is sort of my expression of queer identity. Oh, you need help with this, I'm right there for you. And I don't do that with a lot of people. I always joke I'm an introverted extrovert. Like it looks like I'm very extroverted, but I'm actually like this terrified like anxiety filter. And so if I show a lot of interest, that to me is like when little kids get crushes on people. It's super innocent, but but they're like all about that one person. And I still do that. And it can be absolutely platonic or it could be dang. But it's still to me like it still comes from the same place in myself. And that's the showing genuine interest in what people are doing, to show that they have value because of who they are. And that's for me how I identify. I just want to be around other nice people. And so like it's for me, that is weirdly my core thing. And I was always very shy and awkward, with crushes. And oh my gosh, Arthur. And I mean, and so that was like one thing, but like to me, I didn't quite connect that Arthur was possibly queer until like, way into my like second, like I watched my wife play it first and then I played it. And so it was way into that first time where I actually played it by myself, where I was like, wait a minute. But there were other moments in the game that I already identified. And like, I think we've all had those moments with the game. I mean, we're not just queer people who liked Red Dead Redemption 2. We're queer people who love Red Dead Redemption 2 for so many things, but one of those things happens to be this game is fucking queer. And that's really hard for a lot of people. It's hard for people to cope with. And so we've all had that moment of like, well, okay, well, tell me why it's queer. And we're like, I know why. And so what is for y'all like that aha moment playing the game that let you know that this is way more going on here than we initially thought?
In Indigenous culture, when someone cuts their hair, it varies from tribe to tribe, but a lot of the times it's you cut your hair because someone has passed. And so when Arthur comes back from Tahiti and they're in the swamp and like the gang is all there and we see him hugging the gang and stuff again, and then it's Charles's hair is like shaved on the sides and it's obviously cut, and I'm just like that was like an aha moment, just how close they've always been. That moment just really sticks out for me, just from how their relationship was throughout the game, and then to that moment where like Arthur meant so much to him, to the point where he was willing to cut some of his own hair because our hair is our strength. And I don't know, to me it's like in a way like part of his strength went with him because he really thought Arthur died. So when Arthur died, part of his strength died.
That's a really poignant moment to really connect to. It really is. I mean, and we see how he reacts when Arthur comes back. He's never scared to touch Arthur and hug him.
Yeah. Oh no.
And Arthur just okay.
Yeah.
Arthur. I mean, we can all see John go like stiffening up if someone tries to hug him because he's that way.
I don't want to hug
Charles
my older
always
brother.
seems
Weird.
like Charles always seems like he's standoffish and stuff. And like I've heard some people say like, oh, Charles isn't like affectionate and stuff, but I'm like, are you kidding me? Charles is like really affectionate. He may not be like
he says. Yeah.
He may not be like, you're my moon and stars, or like, very vocal and stuff, but he does show through his actions. His love language is more like through his actions, and when he does speak, you can tell who he considers a friend, and he's very vocal in that too. Like he says, John, you're my friend, or Arthur, like you mean a lot to me.
Oh, for me, the biggest aha moment was when Arthur's talking to Tilly, Karen, and Mary Beth. And they ask him, or at least Tilly does, Arthur, what do you feel like about women? And he's like, I don't think there's much difference between women and men. Most both are awful. There's a few worth loving and dying for, I guess, if they'll let you. And for me, as a bisexual person who's attracted to multiple genders,
Yeah.
it was a big
Oh yeah.
like the light bulb just went off. I was just like, not only is he progressive in the way of like, I see you as equals, but also like to say to love and die for them, like that's a really like big thing to say. Like,
Mhm.
and for me, I'm like, that just expresses to me that he's not closed off based on like one gender attraction. Like, I mean, some people will headcanon him as like gay, and I'm like, but for me, I'm just like, it doesn't really go that way because that's still a mono attraction.
Yeah.
So for me personally, I'm just like, he's definitely more of like a like multi-polysexual person, whether
Yeah.
you want to classify that as pan or bi
Yeah.
or what have you. I'm like, that was the biggest thing for me that really just like made me smile and like feel like seen as like a bisexual person.
And I
So
think it's, go
and
ahead.
to have a more like masculine, like tougher character who like shares like his vulnerabilities about
Mhm.
that was like very important to me.
Yeah. How is that line, show that he's bi? He could just be talking about how he just sees everyone equal. Well,
Sure.
that in and of itself is queer.
Yeah.
Seeing and accepting people as equals despite that they have, but still seeing their differences, which is something that Arthur always did. He understood everybody's issues. That is so queer because it's like that just shows you that he doesn't view people in that way.
To add to that, like he doesn't put people in a box.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And explaining to people why that's considered queer is because to him it's not, he absolutely isn't seeing people in that sexual, way. He's not looking at, I mean, he can be attracted, but he's not like thinking, oh, they're a girl and therefore weak. He's not thinking that. Everybody for him has worth based on different things. I mean, we do see him actively doing that, the way he interacts with Sadie. He doesn't fight her on it, but I mean, we all like immediately recognized characters like Alden at the stagecoach guy.
oh yeah.
It's like, okay, yeah, okay, we hear it. Yeah, it's like, okay, he's gay. It's like, yeah, we see Alden, but to us, that's not what we're looking for when we're looking for queer characters. That's a. I mean, and there are lots of people who are like Alden, but like that he doesn't represent all of us. That's this typical idea of what gay people are. Using the interaction between Charles and Arthur and the way they speak, how it doesn't seem that people don't recognize Charles as being a kind, considerate, sweet talker, and it's like you're not listening well.
No.
I mean, going back to Alden, look that man dead in the eyes and tell me that man hasn't like tried to find some suitors at that train station. Like, tell me, look,
Oh yeah.
a wealthy, nice suitor comes up to him looking for a train ticket to Saint Denis, and just so happens that Alden has 2 tickets. Oh, but you don't need a second ticket. May I come along? Like, come on. Look that man dead in the eye and don't tell me he's snuck off into a stagecoach.
Oh, look, the way that Trelawney leans on the counter.
Oh yeah.
And then before he starts talking, and then he's like, just
listen, I know we've known each other for quite a while. Do me a solid.
This happened in the past, and someone still has a crush.
Yeah.
Yes, I have included that in my fan fiction, by the way. Couldn't help it. But for me, the biggest like, oh my gosh, this is a queer story is Albert Mason, and which oh my gosh, Albert Mason. That whole story, even though he's not my like go-to ship. I mean, he's not even my second go-to ship. I adore Albert, and and that cute little back and forth they had the entire every mission, and how Arthur talks to him differently than he talks to anybody else, outside maybe Charles. And 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 just the way Albert, is talking to him, it just everything about it feels so innocently queer. And Arthur just wants to hang out with this guy. He doesn't have to. He's not getting paid. He's just like, but really, he doesn't get he doesn't even get offered money from Albert.
He doesn't ever complain whenever he's with Albert too. Yeah. He doesn't ever complain about Albert, as if Albert's the issue. It's the issue of there's animals coming to eat you. I hate these animals. It's the animals, not Albert, though. He's like, go do your photos.
Oh, yeah. And Albert's so self-deprecating, which is like a way to allow Arthur to make fun of him. And Arthur's like, it doesn't take the bait ever. He's like, nah, you're fine. It's okay. You're not that dumb.
It's so cute how he's supportive of just like the art process.
Oh, I love it.
He's just like, wow, this is really dangerous, but I mean, all right.
and it's so, they're just so sweet and queer, and the way they interact with each other is so entirely me in a nutshell. When I would be flirting, both of them, and I'd be super awkward and oops, I haven't did this thing and about it also, but I try to show off how artsy I was, but then I'd also like talk to anybody, and so I was like, oh my God, they're gay. I get it. It was like a gateway into seeing the game differently. Because to me, it felt so, well, the writers knew they did this, right? We don't know. They could be putting up a tent later after whenever they meet. So we don't know. Other little weird things, you can like hang out, you can like follow Albert around after 2 of the missions. And it's just little things like that. But it's and a lot of people have locked onto that as well as being their first experience. And I think that's fantastic, because it also, once they know it's there, it's not like we're searching for it, because we've been accused of that before. Where it's, oh no, you're just projecting, you're just looking for it. And it's like, it's really hard to explain how we know, but we know. And once you see that, you start seeing it in so many more characters. The question that's always put out there is what queer characters are in the game, and the 2 characters you always hear first is the rape guy and Alden. How do you explain the difference between identifying those kinds of characters as queer versus identifying characters who are much more subtly queer?
I guess I'll start with rapist, because it's like very obvious. He says like in the dialogue when he gets close to Arthur, and it's like very, from the very beginning, like a very sexual undertone where he's like, hey, and stuff. And it's like, it's just weird and creepy. It's just
always
weird.
Makes me like,
yes, chills. It's like, whether he's gay or not, it's obvious that he's like, there is a sexual undertone and he's a sexual predator.
Right.
And so I think with this, for him, it doesn't really matter who or what it is. It's just, oh, fresh meat. There we go. To put it in like not so nice terms.
Yeah.
But with this is quite obvious, and it's very clear in his like mannerisms and the dialogue alone. I think he calls like Arthur pretty, or like compliments him, or he's like basically kind of alludes to like he possibly did something to Arthur when he was unconscious. So it's like really creepy, and it's very obvious. And I think you can anybody who especially has like went under some kind of harassment before, or who has been SA'd before, it's something you immediately notice right away, whether he is gay or not. It's like, you understand this as a sexual predator. And I guess it's more recognized, this could be pointed out as possibly a stereotype towards gay people, because there have been that stereotype within media that like, oh, gay people are like sexual predators and they're always trying to come after men and like this is how they act and stuff. And I find that very funny because I'm like, it's usually most of the time men who project this kind of image because they know they act this way. So
Yeah.
there's that. And then with Alden, I love Baby Boy to death. And I'm not trying to say this to anybody who has like a voice kind of like Alden, but Alden's voice sometimes for me, like when I'm viewing him as a character, his voice kind of falls into, he kind of has a stereotype gay voice.
Yep.
If you get what I'm saying.
Yep.
But besides the gay voice, it's just like his mannerisms and not to stereotype even more, but he's a little bit prim and proper, but I guess queer in definition is like odd or unusual. And for Alden, he definitely does not act like a man that was during that time, who was like, you know, gruff, like I'm a family man, or like it's quite obvious from the front that he's most likely straight, you know, exuding this toxic masculinity or just masculinity in itself.
Yeah.
And so with Alden, it's just like, he's just more chill, relaxed, and he seems like he has a more open perspective, especially with the whole like coding with Trelawney and stuff too. And just, you know, Alden's just an odd little guy, and queer is a definition. Queer in definition means odd, and it's just like come on, Baby Boy is odd for someone like him during a time like that. He's odd, but in such a good way.
Yeah,
I mean, Trelawney seems to like him very much. So for other gays, it's very on the nose. Like, come on, gay boys, gay.
yeah.
But I guess for other subtly characters that like may not to other people, they wouldn't really know unless it was like very clear in dialogue, like I'm gay or something. I guess it's a little hard for me to explain there because it's just like, I guess seeing Sadie the very first time, like playing the game, I just felt it. I was just like, gay. I was like, gay, somewhere gay. I'm like very saphic, very, very saphic. It's just a feeling. It really just is. And I think it's just like, if you're someone who is queer, you understand those little subtleties. I think with Sadie, it's that like, she takes on both this masculine and feminine front and is like just so flawless with it and very androgynous as well. Not just in her personality, but in how she dresses. And she very much challenges a lot of the like gender norms too, in a way that like was very uncommon for that time. But the way she talks about gender norms, like between her and her husband, it's like pretty progressive. She doesn't talk about it in a way that's like, in bravo to the writing to not making it like she's being like, I'm a woman, like, you know, the feminazi kind of arc. And so she's just like, me and my husband were equals. Like, we did both the stuff. I guess with trying to figure out subtleties within it, it's more of, if you're queer, you just kind of know. But at the same time, it's like I said, queer in definition means odd. So if you're someone who's not queer looking in, I guess like kind of think in perspective of like, what is the societal norms? And definitely for these time periods, and look at how these characters are acting within this society. And because these people have always existed. We as queer people have always existed. So it's like, they are technically an oddity of their time. They are queer.
I liked the you know, touch on like the stereotype characters of like, not saying that people like that don't exist, because they do, but that's the biggest difference with me and recognizing the more subtle characters of like, not every queer person is just like the stereotype, you know, like it's not just this, we look this way or we sound this way or we act like this or things like that. So that's the biggest tell of, you know, when people say, well, how do you know? I'm like, Well, because I am one of those people. So I can just relate to you're just a person and you have your quirks and things that you say or do but it's not always like overly like obvious, you know? So that's really the thing I wanted to say about that.
I used to be, a little bit more bothered by, no obvious, not more obvious stuff. And I know that the language didn't exist back then. It just they didn't have. I mean, I think like they had a couple words, and I've heard NPCs call Arthur those words. Was it pretty boy, fancy boy? One of them,
fancy boy.
Yeah, all these things, and it's like
dressed like that.
If you have Arthur dressed nice and he's outside of Sandy, oh my gosh, they're so horrible to him. Yeah. I walk by one guy and he's like, "Hey," and the guy just calls Fairy, and then keep going. I'm like, "Oh,
did you say Fairy?"
Fairy.
Wow,
a fairy.
I remember fairy. I can't remember. I think it's Hosea. Yeah, I remember like Hosea when they're on the like fishing trip and they're going on their way there and they're talking about when Arthur was young. I mean, Hosea himself, like in terms of like defining like a word for gay, he says like the curious couple and their something son.
Yeah.
And it's like curious. What a cool little word to identify someone that's like, okay, queer.
Yeah. Gosh, I could talk forever about Dutch and Hosea, but yeah.
I know for sure those two have seen each other naked. I just
knew
it.
Oh yeah.
There's they like explored each other.
Definitely.
Yes.
Yeah.
They're just like, hey, we're out here doing our own thing. Like
Hosea.
You know.
Well, in that historical context, it's like, I mean, people went out west.
Yeah.
Because they wanted to be away from cultural control. So
yes. That's exactly what both of those two wanted.
You gay do crimes.
It was like, I hate this fucking nonsense.
So like, I think it's like acceptable, I think, to have those stereotype moments because, we have locked on to all of the, to us, very queer references.
I mean, this game took years to make. Do you have to think about like how much work went into all this detail? So for you to appreciate it like that, or anybody, like any of us, like I think that's very complimentary to the people who helped make the game.
I hope it is, and I don't know if any of them are ever going to like, listen to this.
For sure.
Because I would not know who to ask at Rockstar.
For sure.
Can you confirm this and this? And not that Rockstar would even confirm it to begin with. They like their mystery. But I don't blame them. I really don't. But it's just so interesting how much I'm recognizing the more I play. And I think that yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was gonna point out, I was like, that's a good catch eye of like even picking up on what they're wearing, because like, I mean, queer culture in general and queer history in general, we've had a history of like, even the type of clothing we wear, the way we wear an ascot, or like the way we wear our hair, or the way that we like tie a dress up, or the colors that we wear in such a specific order.
Yeah.
And it's like even the choosing of socks and what length, it's like, it's such a good detail as well. That's a good detail to pick on too.
Yeah.
And like Lauren said, like, I mean, I think Rockstar would be pretty flattered that like fans are deep diving this game.
So going into that, going rapist guy in the forest and the Bill gay jokes, going into that coded way people are, talk to identity, and we still do. What kinds of like, lines that you heard or terminology you seen being used or anything that people said or the way they said it came off as like very much a queer coded dialogue?
What's his name? Margaret.
Margaret, yeah.
Margaret, like the greatest woman lion tamer. I think Margaret doesn't, well, Yeah, Margaret doesn't elaborately say that, like, she does say like she is woman, but it's like also fine with he him pronouns because they do call
Yeah.
Margaret he as well. And it kind of like, I guess some people could say like Margaret would be kind of considered a drag queen because drag queens in that same aspect, like, you know, in drag, a lot of time they're just she. And then outside of drag could just be called by their preferred pronouns or, you
Mhm.
know, mix and match in between.
His little
Um,
mustache too, so
yeah,
yeah.
exactly. So it's like with Margaret, the way she dresses and the way she acts and stuff, it's like she's very much she owns her femininity
Mhm.
and she's kind of playing a character. However, though it's part of her as well. It's her own personality. She's sassy, she's to the point, and she's like kind of that self-deprecating too. It's
Yeah.
just like
Mhm.
I don't know, Margaret kind of reminds me of a lot of like drag queens of our era and just like how them outside of drag, they're just still the same person. They are
Mhm.
still like, you know, snappy, quick-witted, clever, but like also just creative and like even the way they dress is pretty fluid too. So I guess with Margaret, I mean, even when Arthur and like the assistant lion tamer talked about like, you know, well maybe you could be like the first lion tamer that's like actually a woman or something.
Mhm.
And I seen like to me it kind of comes off as like well, it's kind of like poking fun at like drag queens and stuff a little bit, I guess, or it's like kind of just queer people when we poke fun at each other, when we like
True.
are slightly homophobic to each other. It kind of comes off like that a little
Mhm.
bit. It's just queer people poking fun at other queer people.
I like that. I do agree with you that to me it very much came off of like a very like drag queen-esque of like this is who I am, but this is also a entertainment thing that I want to do.
Mhm.
So, and it was like at the time he felt like it was like this revolutionary thing, you know, like this nobody's ever done this before. So the other thing I wanted to say was, especially viewing even this Jose as a queer, like older man, of how he talks about even Bill and the whole like, oh, like Bill, like Jenny and Lenny wouldn't work because too similar. Like Bill and Phil wouldn't work. I've always thought that was so cute and funny because he's not saying it to be like malicious in a way of like, oh, building with a man. He's just making fun of like the whole naming thing, which I
Yeah,
thought was
yeah.
really cute.
Well, I think it's so funny because there are so many moments with, you know, between Dutch and Hosea that are just so old couple, right? Old,
Yeah.
Oh
open
yeah.
relationship, old couple. But
Yeah.
like, but yeah, you'll hear Hosea make fun of Bill. And it's like, and I'm thinking, oh, they're not making fun of Bill because they think he's gay. They're making fun of Bill because Bill thinks everybody's gay and therefore bad. And they're like, but Bill, you're also gay. It's like, you know,
They're
like
kind
that's why
of
they're making fun of him. It's like, oh, dude, just accept it.
they're teasing his internalized homophobia.
They're like, Bill, let me level with you. Come on,
Yeah.
Bill. We know we saw you eyeing the man in the saloon. Come on,
Yeah.
man.
Is he gonna punch him or is he gonna kiss him? I don't know.
Don't they say that in the
Yes.
saloon
do.
though?
Yes.
Yeah.
Arthur,
Arthur says that about Bill.
I think Arthur says it. Yeah, that's what you said. Yeah. He's like, is he gonna punch him or kiss him?
I can see them
Got
happening,
found out.
like, you know, a bunch of queer people into space, and like the one person who's like, "I'm not gay," you know.
Yeah, that's exactly
like,
that's
we're gonna
exactly
make
Bill's
fun of you.
character. Bill's character is that guy.
Anything in any part of that discussion between Alden and Trelawney is like it's just so much queer coding in it, and that discouraged men. Like the first time I heard that, before I really started like making connections. First time I heard that, I'm like, that sound gay to you? And I was like, that's what I was thinking. It's like, I think we're talking about that. And it's like, how is your wife? It's like,
Oh yeah.
and I'm talking about the wife could be literal, or the wife could be just a reference to Alden's bitchy boyfriend. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, but all of that is just like my friend Arthur here is, and you know, and Arthur just goes along with it. And I feel like it's so obvious the kinds of shit that Trelawney is and Alden are suggesting about Arthur, and Arthur's just like, okay, whatever.
Yeah, because like you said, like back then there really wasn't like a lot of terminology for it, and to Arthur, he's just like, this is just like how I am. I don't really need to label it.
Yeah.
So he's just like, whatever.
Yeah, and it's not even subtle. Like,
Yeah.
and like he could have just, I mean, they could have just said the words catfish, and the way they would say it to each other would be suggesting somebody's queer. And because that's just how they are. So it was, I feel like it's great because it is kind of meant to even make like people who don't recognize queerness easily, you go, that felt a little queer. Like, what are they saying here? And so, like, I was just fascinated by that they had secret coding talk. And being from the South, I mean, we hear about this all the time. It still happens. We still, Southern queer people still have a form of queer, a form of queer coding. And it's not just the South, small towns all across the country are the same way.
You talking about that? You know, the strawberry background? Yeah.
Yes.
When I learned about that, because I was like, people were talking about, oh, the mayor has like a secret. And I was like, what is it? And then I was like, when I read more into it, of like, oh, he ran away and he's with his lover and he's gay, and like this like whole thing of like wanting to like industrialize strawberry and stuff, because that's like where he's from, like his home. And I was like, oh, it all makes sense now.
Oh yeah. There's once you start digging, you do every dang mission. Like, the more you dig, and the more you play the game, if you listen to every character, because there's so many Red Dead fans, it's like, where did you see this? You know, what is this? That's nothing. It's like, no, we actually spend so much time engrossed with this world that the more you listen, the more stories there are, and the more you run into that kind of stuff. It's like, oh, there's something else going on here. And whether that ends up just being more mystery, because the game loves to do that to us too, unsolving, not solving things, or, showing these secret lives of these characters. And I find that just to be so just neat that people are still finding this stuff. Like, was it the Mayor Strawberry thing? That was like a recent find people made.
Oh yeah, that was pretty recent. Of like, that's what something was going on, and I couldn't figure it out. Like, oh, now it makes sense.
I mean, like, just look at the way. I mean, for anybody that's looking outside who may not be queer or may not understand like why, like how we pick up these things. Look at the straight couples that people like ship and stuff. How do you know that these couples are into each other? Yeah. And it's just like adapt it into a way that's like, we have to be secretive because no one's going to accept us for how we are. It's like, it's just those somewhat same things, but just more hidden for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
To me, that's why it's so important of when people say like, well, where are you finding this stuff at? Where do you see this? Like, you're just digging for it. I'm like, it's all around us, like in life. I'm like, what do you mean? That has to be just like people have to kiss for you to know that they're in a relationship, like that's just how it is.
Yeah.
So
and I really thank y'all for joining me today. I of course, anytime y'all want to be back on, we'll do it. I was gonna say something and I forgot what I was gonna say, but I remember when people, I think we've all been asked this. I mean, why would game developers go to this length to weave queerness subtly in a game? And I've heard that, but why would they go to that effort? And it's like, have you not played this game? I mean, what? I mean, even people who just go straight to online even spend enough time to see that it's not just a cut and paste game. Everything is so unique and has time spent, has a story, even down to like not even just the shapes of trees, but the way that they're moving. I mean, the fact that there's storm patterns, and in the game that you can actually track, and people have figured out like where can be struck by lightning in the game. I mean, it's like, of course they would. Of course, it's feasible that they would do this. I mean, what they said, the script alone was like, I think it was like they said how tall it was. It was like it's taller than a man, and like a tall man is a man.
A man.
A man.
Big old burly bottom bear man.
Oh gosh. But of course they would put all this in there. I mean, it's this game.
Things just aren't as one-dimensional as people want to believe.
Yeah.
Like, there's so much more depth into it, and that's not a bad thing at all. Like, people want to make it seem like, oh, why would they waste their time doing that? Why would they do that? I'm like, why not?
I mean, we know how much was on stuff. We know how many writers there were just on the NPC stuff. And so, of course, they're going to weave in things like that. And I think it's fantastic. And it is much better on the world, on making this world feel even more fleshed out. Throughout this limited series, I will dedicate each episode to a different topic covering Red Dead Redemption 2's queerness in its coding, historical references, character interactions and missions, members of the gang, sexual attraction, gender, and Arthur Morgan himself, who for many fans has become a queer icon. I will also have an episode about fanfic and art that delve into these topics. Oh, the shipping. Over the course of the series, I will have more panel discussions about these topics with fans of the game. I will also share an interview with the actor Matt Walton, who portrayed Albert Mason, a beloved queer icon in the game. I plan to also reach out to more folk from the game who can provide more insight. I want to thank Lauren and Riri for chatting with me. I thoroughly enjoyed actually getting to speak with them about these topics, since I've only ever typed about it online with them. Until the next episode, I encourage all of you to be loyal to what matters and to always be gay and do crimes.